Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I'm your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you're an interesting person in IT, let us know. You might be the next first person. The next voice you hear will be today's guest. He is Eamon O'Neill. Enjoying a stellar career, Eamon is a global leader, co founder, and CTO with decades of experience bringing strong technical leadership and focus expertise in enterprise software and architecture. Eamon is definitely one of the most interesting people in IT, and we are delighted to have him as a guest on First Person. So, Eamon, welcome. And first up, what is the first thing people should know about you?
Thanks, Matt, for having me on. It's a good question to start with, and I think when I certainly when I talk to customers and other people within lemongrass and the broader industry, the one thing I always try to get across is that I enjoy technology,
Uh-huh.
um, and I like to position myself as a technologist, just because I think it's really important to recognize that the cool thing about technology as an industry is that there's always new things coming. And if you're the kind of person who enjoys that,
Yeah.
um, that will really help you, not just in your career, but in working, day to day with people. And it also gives you a little bit of freedom when you tell people you're a technologist, um,
Yeah.
to kind of focus on really try to understand the technology and explain it to other people. So, yeah, that's the first thing I try to tell people,
Yeah.
and uh, I do it in lots of different scenarios.
Yeah, that's cool. So I guess, I mean, in that scenario you're talking about where it's like a customer conversation, like it's comforting for them, right? Because you're not about the one specific product or service, you're about the technology and you're going to help them solve their problems kind of thing. But also, I think,
Exactly.
I think from a leadership perspective, like not being afraid of the future in that sense, right? If you're a technologist, like you're excited about the next thing. You're
Mhm.
not worried about you're excited about the transformation. You're not worried about the disruption kind of thing.
Exactly, and that's like I recall even when I started out, there was a sense that to really progress, you had to be a manager. You
Right.
had to
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you had to sort of leave your toys behind, as it were, and get on with the serious business of being a manager. But the truth is, that and you see it more these days than you used to, that a lot of very successful leaders are technologists,
Yep.
uh,
Yeah,
who who are very passionate about technology and about their product maybe or their area.
yeah.
And that passion is really important. A technology company that doesn't have that is very dry and very rarely, innovates and succeeds. And
Yeah,
as
and
you
it
rightly say as well, by the way, the attitude of just wanting change is in itself becoming more and more important.
yeah. I think an organization that's led by someone who isn't invested in technology now, like you're not going to spot the next thing on the horizon, right? You're not going to adapt and evolve. And I also think it's interesting. I mean, you touched on lots of themes that I hope we get to, right? But I think one one of the things I've noticed in industry over the past couple of decades is it used to be two very separate paths. Like to your point, it was you became the manager, or maybe you might be the lead developer, and your career topped out at a certain point, but like you could be the specialist in the thing. And I think maybe it's something to do with the difference between leadership and management, but actually to be a real true leader, you kind of need both, right? You need to be able to take people with you, but also have that hunger and thirst for the next thing, not to be afraid of it. So great. So that set us up really nicely for a conversation. We got further than we normally get the whole time, which is great because we move now to section one, which we call first things first. And this is where we like to get to know our guests by understanding some of their first times, going right back to the beginning. You've kind of hinted at that a little bit. But please, could you tell us something about your first job in technology? Tell us about, what brings you to this place. Where did you start?
So I like to think it goes back a little bit further, man, if you don't mind. I mean, to be honest, I think it starts in childhood. I think it starts when you get your first computer, you get your first
Yeah.
sort of little bit of tech. Because I can certainly see a direct line from there
Uh-huh.
um, through, when I got my first ZX Spectrum through to getting to, computer club in
Yeah.
our school. and then into engineering at university. And really, the reason I did engineering even was I wanted to learn how a computer worked. Simple
Uh-huh.
as that. And it really took, we did everything from doping of silicon through to they even generate the power to run a computer through to programming it and all of the layers through machine code and to more advanced programming languages. Um, and that set me up really nicely for my first job, which was with EDS,
Uh-huh.
now part of HPE, yeah, Electronic Data Systems at the time. And that was based out of Dublin. So as a grad, I joined them with a whole bunch of other very similar age guys. And we had a great time working in technology then back in the 90s in Dublin. It
Yeah.
was certainly a really fun time. So, but also EDS being a company with global reach
Mhm.
exposed me very quickly to this idea of business software
Yeah.
and how enterprises, rely so heavily on this
Yeah.
type of software. I find that really exciting too.
No, I bet. And I think it's amazing, first of all, how many people we talk to in this particular series who the question I ask is wrong, right? It's not the first job. It is that first spark that happens in childhood. Equally, as soon as you said Spectrum 48K, I can see the rubber keys. I can see the tape deck
Yeah,
to the side there. Like, and what
absolutely.
a mind blowing step forward that seemed to be at the time. Whereas
Mm.
when my children are getting frustrated if anything takes more than a second to kind of load up on their device,
Exactly.
it's like they want to live in that world. But so lots of things to follow up on there. But what do you think it was about that computer or computing in general that so captured your imagination as a child?
I think I do recall, and again, this is certainly dating ourselves talking about this, but having to type in the machine code
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
a game. And for those who don't know what that's like, I mean, literally at the back of magazines, there were hundreds of rows of hexadecimal
Mhm.
values that you had to type. Get one of them wrong, and nothing would work. So it was, hard work to get that in. But it was that it was the art. It was just the sense of what's possible with this.
Yeah.
Everything from you know doing text-based work through to gaming, and even what I found, again, another bit of an epiphany I recall, is there was a little project in one of the magazines to write code to do a clock. It sounds
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
simple,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it involves a lot of maths where you're doing you know, the the sine, cosine, and how all of that became, in a running computer program became really, it brought it all alive, all of the trigonometry. And so for me, that was also a nice sort of, just like I even find when even today, if I do any programming,
Yeah.
somebody summed it up well to me once. It's like doing a good crossword puzzle. And
Yeah,
that's what it was like even in the early computers was you were solving problems and that in
yeah.
itself was fun.
It's
So yeah,
it's
that
like
was probably
magic,
the
really.
thing that got me.
It's like magic, really,
Sorry,
right?
go ahead.
You create something from nothing, and like even that point where you're typing out someone else's code, but if you get it
Yeah.
right when you hit return, the thing happens, right? That's an incredibly satisfying thing, and I can see how that would be um, uh, very satisfying. But it's an interesting step to go from that through the engineering degree, which, by the way, sounds amazing, right? Because it gave you top to bottom, all round, like in depth knowledge. Of how this technology works. But then to be in a business software perspective, right, it's quite interesting that that first role, there will have been a lot of bright eyed and bushy tailed grads who went in who didn't end up taking the paths you've taken. So, like, what was it about that kind of business software approach? Was it the fact that you could have that same impact, but like at a much greater scale, I suppose? Like, was that what you found kind of satisfying?
Yeah, again, to be perfectly honest, I had no idea what I was getting
Yeah.
into when I joined EDS. I couldn't understand
Yeah.
anything they were telling me at the start because the language of business software is pretty impenetrable for a lot of people. Um, but after a while, it's exactly that. The thing I got a real kick out of, and it's the same little buzz as we talked about with the Spectrum, is when you can get a technology to work at scale you get a real buzz when you see the reaction.
Yeah.
And then there's examples where it can go either way, right? So we had one situation I recall where there was a and it wasn't me, but it was one of our team who basically made a change to production system for a company in Germany. We didn't realize that because that defect that got in prevented the, delivery notes from being printed, that not only was that slowing down the loading of the trucks, but
Yeah.
the trucks were backing up onto a motorway in Germany,
Oh,
and it closed the road. That caused severe traffic that the
wow.
police had to get
Wow.
involved in. And this was a this was a major incident,
Yeah.
on the local logistics, and we had no idea,
Yeah.
until the CIO explained to us why printing was so important,
Mm.
for that company and the surrounding, community. So, you know, while you have some great, impact, but you get also some very terrible impact if you're not careful.
No,
But
completely.
that yeah. That's the nice thing about enterprise is
Yeah.
you do see these huge scales of impact, which hopefully you're on the right side each time.
No, completely. I it resonates from my own professional life where I used to edit one of those computer magazines actually,
Alright.
a little bit later on, but like in the consumer space. And then when you move into B2B, when you move into enterprise, covering enterprise, like sometimes other journalists would be a bit like, "Huh, isn't that boring?" And you're like, quite the opposite actually. Like CIOs do amazing things that impacts lots and lots of people, right? And once you're walking down the street and you understand the impact of like the work of the CIO on the coffee shop or like the gym, it kind of like if you're interested in this stuff, it's incredibly interesting on
Yeah.
a much greater scale than anything you could do in kind of a more consumer space. So you're in there, like I could completely see how exciting and satisfying that was from a work perspective. How do you go from there to where you are now? I mean, what's the path from being that grad to being, a global leader as you are today?
Well, I guess I took, from EDS, I left after, I think it was 4 or 5 years and then, joined IBM as a contractor back again in the mid-90s, and that was just as contracting as a work mode was
Yeah.
starting to become more normalized, and, um but there was a real sense of freedom, being a contractor. I loved it. Did a couple of years of that, but that freedom also encourages you to try things,
Right.
especially when you're a bit younger. Try things with impunity, as it were. And so I set up a company with a few other colleagues from IBM back in 1998, and then we set up a consulting company that was doing the same sort of thing we were working on, but via ourselves and for customers in Ireland. And that was, that in itself was obviously really good fun, tough, but you learn a lot doing
Uh,
that. I mean, one of the guys said to me, running this company is like having 3 MBAs because, you really are taking the pain yourself,
yeah.
you know? We went some months without any salaries, of course, and then you take the rewards and where you can see, um, big successes,
Mhm.
and that really stands by you. Um, and then, I sold that company in 2006 and then set up Lemongrass, the one I worked on in 2008. And that was, a similar type sort of motivation, but very focused this time around, much more on the technology, the underlying technology for enterprise,
Yeah.
cloud largely, and automation and AI.
Yeah.
So those are all just sort of passions, things that I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And I found like-minded people who wanted to get into it as well. Um, but that's, um, again, the enterprise angle here, work with some of the biggest companies in the world
Yeah.
means that you get to talk about, bigger topics, you get to influence bigger things, you get involved in more and more discussions and groups um, and that's really where I am now. It's, as I said, I still very much a technologist, but I spend a lot of my time talking about it now and
Yeah.
showing people, but I still absolutely like to roll my sleeves up and
Yeah.
learn the technology myself. Otherwise, I lose credibility for sure.
Well, and the satisfaction of solving bigger problems for your customers as well, that is pretty huge, I would imagine. So it's interesting because one of the next questions I would ask normally is about, like, mentors and bosses, right? You know, if and I will ask you that question, but also what's coming across clearly is in both of those scenarios, both of those organizations you set up, you talked a lot about the colleagues, right? The people you worked with kind of, and maybe that becomes almost part of it as uh, a supportive network of people who can help you, you know, move forward. Because basically you've had two organizations that you set up yourself, right? You've not climbed a corporate ladder here. You've
Mm.
built the ladder kind of thing. So I don't know, were there any great bosses or mentors around there, or has it been about those collegiate relationships where you've been supported and mentoring within the organization?
Um, yeah, I would say that there's always, I'd say everybody well, anybody I worked for in the early days, absolutely took a lot away from that.
Yeah,
Um, some just different small things, some that are slightly bigger. Uh, I think the really tough times, you have to, you have to hope that your colleagues are are there for you, and they were. There's always tough times,
yeah,
but you've also got to dig deep in yourself. You've got to
yeah.
figure out how do you deal with that. That's something that's unavoidable. Um,
Mhm.
because other people are relying on you as well. So it's not just you're the center of this universe. Um, but what I'd say, I think for me, the one thing I would say is I've always tried to keep an open mind about people, and I've always tried to learn from people.
Yeah,
So and I can see even today the team that we've got in Lemongrass, there are plenty of people that I absolutely trust and learn from every day.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
people I
yeah,
rely on completely. And we've got a fantastic exec team now in Lemongrass that's made up of people with very different backgrounds, but all able to do things I can't do,
yeah.
or I'm not interested in doing.
Yeah, don't
But
wanna do.
well, exactly, and that's one thing that you do sort of learn a little bit when you start a company is uh, you know yes, you want to influence everything. Yes, you want it to go a certain way, but at some point, you're not as good as other people at doing that, and you're far better served by getting good people to do that and focusing on what you're good at yourself.
Yeah,
And then it
yeah,
becomes not just more effective, but way more fun.
yeah. No, I'm sure, and I think that also speaks to where we started here, where you talked about, you know, levels of excitement around technology. Also, you know, if you are like, to get good things from the people you interact with, and I completely agree, right? Nobody's perfect. Everyone's got something to offer. And, you know, we tend to look at people through the prisms of ourselves on our best day. Um,
Yeah.
but actually, the people who are very different are often the people who can help you the most. But you have to be willing to look for and find those things, right? Which requires a certain amount of humility and a lot of curiosity and empathy. And I
Yeah.
think that, to my mind, that does relate to your opening statement about being excited about new technology, right? Like you need to be excited about the possibilities of learning from the people you work with and for.
Completely correct. Yeah, I mean, I think and that evolves. That's something that, as you mature,
Yeah.
becomes a bit more
Yeah, yeah,
obvious. That and largely through making mistakes,
yeah,
it becomes more obvious as well. So I wouldn't expect a 22-year-old to come out
yeah,
understanding all that. If they listen, yes, absolutely great. You can accelerate your learning, but
yeah,
sometimes you actually have to experience it
yeah,
to get it.
clearly. Yeah. Well, let's
And
jump
both
to,
sides.
because it's all been too positive so far. So we're going to move to section two, which we call first fails. And you trailed this quite nicely. First of all, by describing somebody else's mistake, which has a massive impact. But also, as you just said, right, like, you know, that 22-year-old person or whomever, you kind of need to make the mistakes to get the scars to learn, right? So I'm just wondering if in your career, like, that there's any particular one or first big mistake that, you know, you recall, and either it keeps you awake at night or it's just that was a good learning experience kind of thing.
Well, I suppose if I was to look back, I would say more on the business side than on the technology side was where I would see mistakes, and I would I would say my recurring failure is to not move quickly enough.
Right.
Um, I'm a bit of a procrastinator by nature, which isn't always a bad thing. I've learned
No,
sometimes procrastinators can manage to
definitely.
squeeze out a lot of things quickly when they need to, but at the same time, I would certainly look at examples where I kick myself for deferring the
Yeah.
work or the decision, or um, and if I'd moved quicker, I would be better off. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think that's something that I could see a bit of a trail of mistakes
Yeah.
in that respect.
But
Um, Go
but
ahead.
to your point, it's not always the worst thing, right? I remember I used to work for a CEO who used to say, "Always put off until tomorrow what you don't have to do today," right? Like, and he, it was kind of tongue in cheek, but to your point, procrastination is fine if you're able to make the decisions when you need to make the decisions,
Yeah.
right? Because some people do kind of go too fast into things. But I guess
Oh,
are
for
there
sure.
any specifics you can think of, like, or it's just a general trend through your career, really? Kind of thing?
Yeah, I can think of some examples. Although I'm not quite sure which ones would be the most appropriate to reveal, but certainly, if I think about one example, I guess was we for many years we started working with AWS since 2010,
Yeah.
and that's quite a that was very early on. So
Yeah.
I certainly would say that was a late decision. But and AWS is such an amazing company, an amazing technology that
Yeah.
we built our company on the back of that. Um, but there was a time, I think in 2016 or so, where we started working with Microsoft, and I realized that while AWS was still the leader in the space for sure, um, Microsoft would definitely become, with their Azure product, would
Yeah.
become a big player. Very, very obvious to me that the whole Microsoft Office angle was going to be a big factor,
Yeah.
and we started talking with Microsoft, and we actually did strike up a pretty good relationship quite early on. But then we recognized we were still very small, and we didn't have the capacity to take it on. And it was just a sense of, well, maybe we just stay focused on AWS, and we kicked it to touch for a few years. We came back eventually and did it, but there was 3 or so years where, in retrospect, I wish we had done it. We had pushed
Right.
ourselves a little harder, because that would have put us in an even better situation over that period. Um, there are a couple of other examples like that, which I look back on and go, yeah, we did it probably for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always a temptation to do everything, and then you start to lose focus. But
Yeah.
at the same time, getting that balance right is very difficult. But in
Yes.
retrospect, it's very obvious,
But
and uh, and I think we probably could have pushed ourselves a little harder
but
back in
obviously not
2015.
not a critical mistake, right? You weren't wrong in thinking we should be focused here. It may have been better to be focused there as well, but,
Yeah,
that that's, that's a decision made for the right reasons that may, in retrospect, have not been optimal, right? But it's
correct. Yeah,
obviously not a
yeah,
critical mistake, yeah.
yeah. It wasn't a
But
disaster, but it was a missed opportunity for sure.
yeah. Well, another question that I like to ask around about now, which, you never know what you're gonna get right, but is in that context, can you think about a time when you realized something that you thought you knew, like, might actually turn out not to be true? I'll give you an example, like, because
Yeah.
it's related. Like, I was speaking to, a group of, consultants recently, and they were talking about how they'd spent years telling their clients that cloud would always be cheaper. And then, but then FinOps wouldn't exist if we didn't have to optimize costs, right? Like, public cloud definitely can be cheaper, right? But it isn't always the case, right? It's not a truism. So I don't know if you've had anything like that that you could think of through your career.
Um, well, definitely. I think some of the predictions um, can go spectacularly backwards.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, it's all due to extrapolating the data, but then maybe
Yeah.
not understanding the technology well enough. Um, but I have to say, I think in some ways we were maybe over optimistic on the adoption rate. for
All right.
cloud because it was as obvious as day to me that this is
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
should run
yeah,
everything. But then what I hadn't taken into account was what are the reasons some people wouldn't move to cloud, for example. And and some of those were a lot of those were commercial,
yeah.
not financial, not like the finance model, but
Yeah, 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 yeah.
contractual. And then there were incumbents who didn't want to do this or didn't want their customer to do this that blocked the cloud adoption. And I suppose the one thing that we maybe missed that was a very good point was around operational model and changing the
Yeah.
operating model around cloud. And that's something that we kind of missed certainly at the very start. I would say for the first 5 years, we didn't really appreciate the impact the way people should work with cloud would have on the teams that were in place.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things, as you mentioned, is FinOps. It took us a while as well to realize that, yeah, this price, everything's cheaper. But actually, if you don't know what you're doing with it, it can be end up more expensive.
Yeah, yeah,
Same
yeah.
thing for security. Yeah, it can be absolutely more secure, but if you don't know what you're doing, it's less secure.
Yeah.
And finally, just the way you make changes. We thought early on that doing that for SAP would be way too risky. Automating SAP changes, we thought that was actually a really bad idea, and we were completely wrong. We were 180 degrees wrong in that,
Right.
and we ended up when we realized how to do it, we suddenly the penny dropped because we understood it better and went, actually, this is absolutely the way to do it. So,
Yeah.
so in those early days, the way we thought you would operate cloud was just pretty much copy paste from what people did in data centers, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
we
yeah.
were we were completely wrong
Yeah.
in those sort of uh, assumptions, and that was good that certain customers were challenging us. Surely we need to change things here, and we were saying no, no, it'll be the same. And then we pivoted after about 4 or 5 years. We started to realize, no, no, there's far more to be gained here by
Yeah.
adopting the modern ways of working.
But that's kind of what I was hearing when you said that, though. Like, again, these are not kind of critical errors. These are, like, maybe not immediately jumping on the optimal solution.
Mm.
And let's not forget, like, this was happening for the first time, right? No one had been through this kind of change. And then also the final point, like, goes right back to the beginning when you talked about talking to customers and being interested in technology. The organization and you were obviously open to getting feedback from
Mm.
customers, which is how we move forward, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think it's a pretty cool learning experience that you're describing there, really.
And maybe that's a point to kind of reemphasize as well is the importance of customer feedback.
Yeah.
Again, something that sounds trite. It sounds like everybody says it. Um, but to me, it's almost like being asked an exam question and somebody giving you the answer.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and the customer's telling you what they want to buy.
totally.
The customer's telling you, and they're very happy to tell you what they want. You just have to open your ears and realize,
Yeah.
well, why would I go off and try to second guess them if they're saying this is what they want?
Oh, yeah.
So and again, that took a while for me to really for the penny to drop on that one too.
Yeah.
Um, but it's such a great lesson for people to learn is when they start to realize that it's a shortcut. It's almost like a
Yeah.
hack.
Well, no, it is because, and again, this is the downside of being invested in the technology itself. Is we'll all have met people in our working lives who are brilliant at the technology but don't know how to create solutions, and
Mm,
solutions are mapping together the technology and the customer's problem, right? And like you have to hear from the customer to do that. Is such an important point. Um, this is amazing. I'm having a great time. We could talk probably for hours, but we haven't got hours. So I'm going to move on to section three, which we call quick fire firsts. This is where we want to get to know you beyond and behind your professional veneer by asking you, frankly, stupid questions. We do that by using a piece of proprietary technology I developed, which we call our random question generator. So if you could please, Eamon, pick a number between 1 and 13.
139, please.
Number 9. Okay, this one comes up a little bit actually. What would be the first thing you would buy if you were to win the lottery?
Golf simulator.
Oh,
I
there
really
you
want a golf.
tell me about your golf.
I mean, I've just dreamed about having a golf simulator for so long, but A, you need the space. B, you need the pay for the kit.
Yeah.
Um, I'm convinced it'll be my breakthrough and get me onto the PGA Tour.
So do you think so this is a this is to improve your performance in real
Yeah,
life. Okay.
yeah.
And tell me about it. Like how we're doing today, and what's it going to take to get you onto the PGA Tour?
So, a bit of a miracle, I would suggest, but no, I think, so I'm playing off, 18 handicap.
Proper
Um,
golfer, bogey golfer. Okay, yeah, yeah. We
yeah,
can
well, I've
never
been playing
play
for a long
because you just
time,
get
but I've
annoyed
I've
with me
never
taking
really,
2 shots on every hole.
until the last few years. But but, uh, but I just love, I mean, everybody who plays golf loves the 2 things, I think. One is there's always a chance you're gonna get better, and,
Yeah,
there's always room to improve. And then secondly, I think what every golfer loves is when you watch it on TV and you realize that every so often there's a shot that you've hit, which is
yeah,
better than the hit.
yeah.
And, that sort of sense that world class is, albeit fleeting, it can't be within
Just
your
there.
reach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I play football. I play soccer. I have played cricket. You don't get to play at Wembley or Lords, right? Whereas, when you're playing golf, you're playing exactly the same game in the same
Yeah,
conditions as the pro,
exactly.
and you only need one good shot to want to go back again, right? That's what I always
That's
find.
all it takes.
All right, okay. Let's go for one more. Can you give me one more between 1 and 13?
7.
Number 7. Okay, the first place you would travel if money, time, commitments were no object. You can just go right now. Where would you go?
Um, I think either Thailand, Bali kind of area. I'd say Thailand, maybe Thailand. I've been there before, absolutely loved it. Just incredible country, lovely people, great food. Obviously, the weather's amazing.
Doesn't hurt.
No, I had a really good, yeah. I mean, there's loads of places I'd love to go though. I really enjoy. I did travel quite a lot when I was younger, and I got a really good sense of
Yeah.
some places in the world. Africa is not. I mean, that's not a very big place, but it's like sub-Saharan Africa
Yeah,
specifically. I just thought it's incredible.
yeah.
Um, and obviously, well, I say obviously, but Latin America too. Brazil is stupendous. Love it over there. So yeah, there's lots of places I would like to go, but if you had to pick one, I probably would pick
1.
Thailand. Just to say,
Okay. And maybe, maybe Thailand, but there's like a really excellent golf course just over there. Good luck with that.
they have plenty of good courses apparently. I've never played there, but
Yeah.
I would certainly look to get around in while I was there.
I think you should if you like, there's a golf course I played once in the Gambia, talking of Sub-Saharan Africa,
Oh,
where there's
wow.
no grass. There's no grass in the Gambia, so you have to take around a square of, in effect, it's like the stuff you get in greengrocers, where they put the,
Yeah,
and you land on the sand, and then you put that down and hit again, but it's just stunning, and again, that's another great thing about golf, right? Wherever you go in the world, you can have a different experience
yeah,
of
yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. We always get something interesting from those questions. So I'm sad to say, we're now going to move into our final section. We're almost at the end, and we call this first and final thoughts. And I'm excited to ask you actually, Eamon, what's the first piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out now?
I think the advice I I have given a few people in the past is get into a really good company. I know it sounds really
Yeah.
again cheesy,
Yeah.
but my experience of working with a, a bigger company was very, very positive. I think bigger companies tend to have a lot of opportunities to move around inside.
Mhm.
So I think that's a great start. It's not the only way to do it, of course. Smaller companies have their own strength as well, obviously, but smaller companies you can progress faster. But bigger companies, certainly if you're starting out, give you a bit more time, a bit
Yeah.
more support, and you can maybe pick a different direction more easily if you need to. So I think that's always a good place to start. But at the same time, no matter where you start, uh, spending the time to learn the technology that you
Yeah.
want to be good at
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot, but you should read the manuals.
Yeah.
Okay,
Do the
that's
learning.
something else I find people miss all the time is just read
Yeah.
the manual and
Well,
read the documentation. It's
it,
incredibly helpful.
it kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier and I think about myself as a 22-year-old. Like, like it took me 3 years of university to realize I liked learning at university and then do the work kind of thing. And I think when
Yeah.
you talked about getting into a good organization, I think that's so true in the sense that what you're reflecting there is you get out of it what you put in, right? So in a large
Yeah.
organization, if you're prepared to take the opportunities, do the work, find out about the technology, you're going to get more back from it. But it does require that mindset as well. Eamon, what's the first project or achievement that you would want to tell people about? What's your masterpiece? And I'm guessing it might be lemongrass, right?
Absolutely. I think what we've done in lemongrass is fantastic, but what we're doing right now in lemongrass is more exciting than anything that I've done before, which is using AI to
Uh-huh.
drive a lot of the services we're delivering. And some of the latest productization of that is as good a technology as I've ever seen. So yeah, I mean, I think we're entering a world where I know it's again it's overblown sometimes, but what AI will do, certainly in IT services, it will be incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
But but just like every disruption that's happened to date, there'll be there'll be people who'll lean into it and people who'll shy away from it, and it's just obvious. But worth saying is that if you're a technologist, you should always be leaning into these changes,
No, 100%.
mastering them, get good at it, and then help other people take advantage of it as well.
Well, and yeah, I completely agree. The final question we ask is always for an audience of technologists, which this is. What are your final thoughts? And I wonder if, in the context of what we're talking about here, because this is a real inflection point, right? It is a very disruptive time. But I mean, it feels to me like the wisdom of Eamon, the final thoughts are about that, right? Which is taking together everything you've said in this era of AI as a technologist, like lean into it and look for the solutions and the upsides rather than worrying about the disruption kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've seen, and this is what I get quite excited about, is when I see a technology starting to get used properly,
Mhm.
then you can extrapolate out of that what's going to come next, I guess. And to be perfectly frank, AI, Gen AI specifically, has been overblown, oversold quite a lot. I actually see why people have made this mistake. This concept of a declarative technology, do this, you just ask for it and it gets done. Yeah, it's very tempting to get carried away with that. And I've
Mhm.
seen people make that mistake. Very experienced people just totally miss what are the limits of this.
Yeah.
But when you see how to wrangle those limits, um, and you start to see how it can be helpful, um, then what we're seeing is, as I've been said now internally to our team, is we're no longer a technology enabled services company. We are now an AI enabled services company. And there's a subtle difference, but it's a very practical, pragmatic, and real difference there. And what I'm telling people is, because this is what I'm starting to see already in lemongrass, is that good people will be even more capable with AI.
Yeah.
Bad people will be even more exposed with AI.
Yeah, it's exponential, right? It's an amplifier. Yeah.
Exactly, it amplifies your behavior, your talent, um, and I think that for very talented people, AI is going to be
Yeah.
an incredibly exciting thing to use. For people who shy away from change, it's going to be a constant sword over their head. It's going to feel like that, at least anyway.
Yeah.
And I do believe there will be a lot of disruption. There will be a lot of job displacement, but not as much. It's not going to be a catastrophe. It's going to be a very fluid change, but you will absolutely see strong technology leaders will have a fantastic opportunity ahead of them with this.
Yeah, I quite agree, and that's a very positive message to end on, right? If you're adding value, you're going to add more value with AI, and if you aren't, that's the problem. It's not the AI. My thanks to Eamon O'Neill for this amazing conversation, and thanks to you for watching or listening to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I've been your host, Matt Egan, and I'm asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you're an interesting person in IT, let us know. You might be the next First Person. But today's guest has been Eamon O'Neill, and I'd like to leave him the final word. So I'll say goodbye, and thank you so much, Eamon.
Thanks, Matt, for having me, and thanks everyone for listening.